Well, good morning, and delighted that so many people decided to spend an hour with me this morning talking about my book. Now, I know a couple of you have it already, and you didn't need to have it to come to this. And hopefully, if you don't have it, maybe by the end of the hour, you may actually go to Amazon and purchase it. But I wanted to share a little bit about my hopes around the book and go through how it came to be, and then explain the organizational principle, and then actually take us through a possible way of using the book, just one, which would be more like a Lectio reading and a reflection, and then open it up for questions. So that's how I see the hour going. So hopefully that will be something that you'll find interesting. For some of you, you'll know some of this because I want to start with sort of a thumbnail sketch of my life, very short, because part of this whole experience has been out of all the things that have gone on in my life that have influenced my spirituality, my understanding of God, and my understanding of justice. So I grew up as a very traditional Catholic little girl on the south side of Chicago in the 50s and 60s. I was taught by the congregation that I eventually entered, the IHMs of Monroe, Michigan. And I always loved God, and I wanted to be perfect. And in the Catholic Church at that time, perfection came by becoming a woman religious for women. So I joined the community in 1966. For those of you coming out of the Catholic tradition, and you might remember the Second Vatican Council. For those who do not have that Catholic background, this was an incredible opening up of the windows of the Roman Catholic Church, sort of giving in fresh new energy. Since the Middle Ages, things weren't changing. And all of a sudden, Pope John the 23rd came in and started to make an incredible influence in terms of theology, how we live religious life, etc. It transformed us. Well, I didn't know about a lot of it in 63, but the IHMs did. So by the time I entered in 66, things had begun to change. And the thing was, I didn't like it. I loved what the traditional church was all about. It's what I grew up with for the 18 years. But I thought it would be that way until I died. Well, of course, nothing's going to last that long, and certainly not this. But the education I received in Monroe as an undergraduate was mind-blowing for me. I learned about process theology, process philosophy, liberation theology, and the social justice teachings of the church. And in connection with the intellect, I learned how to pray. And we learned about the mystics, especially Teresa of Avila, and the more modern day ones, Thomas Merton, and even Teilhard de Chardin. I remember I was in the postulate, which is the first year of religious life, and there on the desk was the Divine Milieu. So I picked it up and read it. Now, I loved it. Now, I thought I understood it. I'm sure I didn't understand a piece of it, but it was just enough to give me that taste of what Teilhard, as a scientist, could see as a mystic. And that sort of stayed with me throughout my life. And then this kind of study continued in St. Louis University, where I finished my BA in philosophy and political science. But those years also offered me some hands-on experience with the economically disadvantaged, the women's movement, and the peace movement. And that foundation continued to develop through my life as I continued with ongoing learning, action on behalf of social justice, and commitment to prayer and the interior life. So needless to say, this brought me face to face with what I learned growing up and what my own experience was now telling me about my faith, God, self, and the world. Now, my ministerial experiences continue to broaden that and confirm it. I taught in one of our high schools in the wealthy suburbs and one in the inner city of Detroit. And then I went to Washington, D.C. for 15 years, a very different time. But I spent that time with Network, a national Catholic social justice lobby. And that gave me such an understanding of our political process and how faith was integrated and could connect to the political realities. I then was elected to leadership in my own congregation and during that time served in the leadership capacity with the national organization called Leadership Conference of Women Religious. And because of those experiences, political impasse and clerical church impasse, I knew in 2002 that I wanted to offer another way of looking at the kind of powerlessness we experienced during that time in the church and in government. And so I founded the Institute for Communal Contemplation and Dialogue. So it tried to address that impasse, that feeling of powerlessness. In Connie Fitzgerald's words, the kind of dark night of the soul societally. And how could we imagine new possibilities so that we could find ways of responding in another way from our innermost self? So that's what I've been doing for the last 22 years, designing programs and processes, giving talks, presentations, and then writing for publications. How my commitment to contemplation has really deepened who I am interiorly, but also how I go out and relate to the world. And it's given me new expressions of my experience of the divine and of the world and how to transform that in small ways, but in significant ways, hopefully. So it's come 2022, so 20 years later, I started to sense that maybe what I'm doing had some meaning, some possibilities for other people. And so I had been writing a Global Sisters Report. Some of you may have followed that since 2014. And so I really had almost 150 or so reflections that I was able to look at and say, you know what, some of these make sense. And I don't know if you're a writer, you may understand this. You look at something you read and you say, oh, that's pretty good, but who wrote it? Because how could I have done it? And I started thinking, this might be able to be redone in a way, not just recopied, but how do you look at this in a new way? And so actually, Rebecca was very helpful here. She sort of surprised me in the end of 2021 by putting together, or 2022, putting together all of those reflections. And that's really what started me thinking about it. And so I decided, okay, I think it's worth it, and let's try for a book. So I'm going to go now and share my screen and put a PowerPoint up to do the rest of the conversation. Let's see. Okay. So, Journey Faith in an Entangled World. And the reason that that is a very important title, and I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but that has become then the book. And I know some of you have it right there, but I'll be putting some of this on the screen so you can actually see it better than me holding it up. And so Journey Faith is a term that actually Pope Francis used to differentiate from a lab faith or creedal faith, which is often disconnected to one's experience. And so many of us think, well, how can I still believe? Maybe I don't believe any longer in some of the literal translation of our faith. And here's Pope Francis saying, you know what? It doesn't have to be that. You can have a lab faith. And what is a lab faith? Well, it's one that actually shows the interconnectedness of things. And so in my life, it was as I went through that journey between understanding process philosophy, eventually quantum physics, development of consciousness, they weren't separate silos in my life. They started getting connected. They started getting into a sort of an entanglement. And so I thought the word entanglement, which is a key concept in quantum physics, sort of describes that interconnectedness of everything. So not thinking of faith in one silo and science or spirit, or science in the other, they really are connected. And so that's why I thought the title was significant for me, because it sort of expresses what I have found in my own experience. And why did I write the book? Well, I wanted to explore how to address the problems of today from a different consciousness than the one that created them. And that might sound familiar to you, because that's what Einstein told us. He said, we cannot solve the issues of today out of the same mindset worldview. And that's what I think we've been trying to do. We're still stuck in a certain way of approaching things in a dualistic way. And so the problems then have to be addressed in another way, something new. I wanted to address that false separation of faith and science because I believe since the modern era, so we're talking probably since the 1500s, Galileo and our guys who we put into jail because we didn't want to, the church did not like the idea that the earth was at the center of the universe. But that separation has continued there. And today, with a lot of the stuff that's going on politically, you start to hear it again, especially in the Christian nationalists. And so you see it's still quite alive in us. And so how can I understand, how can I live within my faith tradition, which I think has a lot to offer, as many of the other traditions do too, even as I integrate the insights of evolution, quantum physics, and the development of consciousness within it. And to share how contemplative prayer has invited me to take a long, loving look at the real. And I often use that phrase as describing contemplation. And awakened in me a way of being that involves both transformation of self and re-engagement with the world in ways that could contribute to an emerging future propelled by love. So let me just go back to that for a minute before we go to that last point. It's not simply transformation of self. You know, too often we thought of contemplation as a personal, privatized experience prayer. It is a transformation of self, and in doing that, it's a re-engagement with the world. And I think it can help us respond out of love to the future, as difficult as perhaps this is going to be in the months and years to come. And I wanted to share experiences of God, divine mystery, entangled with everyday life as signs of hope on the journey. So for whom did I write this book? Well, pretty broad. People would say, why don't you write a book for this, for this, for this? And it was hard because, of course, I'm coming out of the Catholic Christian tradition. So it's clearly that. But because we are stepping into a place where it's not either or, religions aren't said which is the best religion anymore. You don't have to say, you don't have to convert people to your religion. It's much broader. And I think so many people are hungry for that kind of spirituality. So it's pretty broad for anyone who desires to express their experience of God, divine love, in ways that reflect their evolving understanding of self, others, and the world, and who, even in the face of impasse or powerlessness, desire to do something about our future. It's not for people who want to just have a me and God experience, although that might actually come from it. But it's truly to see how does that transformational experience place me into an active interaction with the everyday world around me. And so it can be used individually and communally as a resource to engage our political and cultural realities out of a contemplative heart. And I even got more, I guess in a certain way, got clearer about that after the elections. I thought, you know, truly in these last 3 weeks, as I've been trying to market the book, believing as I kept rereading and praying in it, it really has good things for us to begin to engage, like personally and with others around, in order to have people come to their own understanding of what this can be all about. And it begins to educate for public contemplation. Now, that phrase is a hard one because some people think, does it mean praying publicly, standing around publicly in contemplation? No, it's actually a term that Constance Fitzgerald, who's a cloistered Carmelite from Maryland, has tried to put into her writing. And it really caught my imagination because what it means more is how wherever you are, you begin to infuse into your meetings, into your sharing, a kind of an understanding of quieting yourself. I mean, today we know that people at business meetings take some time just to be quiet, but to sort of deepen that spaciousness to hear each other so we can begin that transformation that is so needed. So what she says about it is that public contemplation is a profound re-education of human desire and consciousness, so needed at this time in Earth's evolutionary process. And in one of her articles, she goes on about how our selfishness, our kind of ongoing greed, et cetera, has to be transformed. We must continue to evolve into a new space. And it is a capacity to hold the larger picture so we can move together into the future. And I think today, as we think about how can we move together, I struggle having been in Washington and knowing what we are dismantling is very painful. And how do we hold a larger picture? How can we move together into the future at this time? And I think we don't have the answers yet. We may never have an answer, but what's our attitude? How can we keep increasing that capacity? And I quote her here, this may be the most basic challenge of education today, education for transformative contemplation, which would radically affect human motivation, consciousness, desire, and ultimately every other area of human life and endeavor. And if you hear an echo of Ilia Delio, if you happen to have read her or heard her, you know that she too is talking about that shift in evolution, that next stage. And even though it may not seem like that, we know people like ourselves are in that larger movement for evolutionary change. So how is it organized? It's organized like an art exhibit. Now, two things here. Why? I had a great woman, Rosa Sluber, was the artist that helped to figure out how to have the book look and the feel of the book. We talked together about what I wanted, how she could create it. And she was saying, when I decided it was an art exhibit, because I felt like I was curating a lot of my work, but different. You're curating, but you're organizing it differently. But she made the comment that in an art exhibit, what you're looking at on the wall that's not the creative act. You are looking at the residual. You have to take in that picture and allow it to enter you, and then you respond. So I thought, that's really what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to convert people. I'm not trying to tell people this is how you have to do it. I'm giving them one way of doing things and inviting them to read the reflections, take a contemplative space to reflect on them, and then see what happens in you, see what's emerging in you. How do you engage your life experiences? And so it became then an art exhibit. And so here's the cover of the book. Those of you who have it, you can hold it up. But it's, again, the entanglement. So it's Journey Faith in an Entangled World. Now, I wanted to go through the table of contents, but I thought that was the easiest way to just show you a little bit and see how it's connected. In this art exhibit, it talks a little bit about the metaphor of it and why we're using it. But you're invited, just like you would if you went into an art exhibit, usually is something about the artist. So that gallery 1 is my journey. It's taking that thumbnail sketch and really expanding on it to see what are the influences in my life that have shaped my experiences that now shape what I'm writing and what I'm offering to you. After every gallery, there's a spaciousness to create, and I'll show you that in a minute, because it's an invitation for you to respond to what you reflected on, to what is going on in your life in hopefully new and helpful ways. The second gallery is the medium. So what am I painting with? One, it's actually contemplation. So if you look at what's under there, this is really ways that I've been teaching this for the last few years, drawing on a whole lot of people, but putting it together, the contemplative practice, witnessing presence, which is that deeper space where we can really become, how do we really respond out of love rather than reacting to things? Contemplative dialogue, I think one of the best articles that was written by Jean Alvarez for the Institute long time ago. And so I looked at it, I thought, really, it is still one of the best. So you can really learn how do you engage people in dialogue? How do you engage yourself in dialogue? And then communal contemplation and education for public contemplation. So you're invited to read those first 2 galleries through, like really, because that really gives you the basis for the art exhibit. But after that, to just meander through the art exhibit, just like you would do if you were actually going to the art museum. And so the gallery 3 is seeing the real of our times. And these are the critical issues of today, or some of them. They're obviously not all of them, and may not have your favorite one, but they're major. So it's the climate change, it's immigration, racism, the pandemic, and then violence and sexual abuse. So again, these aren't analyses. These aren't dissertation topics. They're not historical. They are personal of mine reflections on a reality that I experienced that point to how can we live this out of the gospel, out of a contemplative heart in different ways. Gallery 4 is Public Life and Democracy. And as I kept reading them, I thought, oh my heavens, we certainly need this. You know, how can we still be one nation? You're walking a tightrope to reinvent our democracy. Need for transformational leaders. When the future is obscure, what do we do? Go back and fetch it. What might be in our history that we want to bring into the future? We might reshape it, but there's still values there. Can Christians be progressive? Yes. And then that was a sharing of about 10 different congregations of women religious. But when you read why they do their work for justice, you can understand that the gospel is not interpreted only the way the Christian nationalists might like us to believe. There is such an active, loving justice component to it. Then Gallery 5 are the Christian feasts. So not all of them. They go from Advent to Easter. But that's where there's a little more of the evolutionary understanding, the influence of quantum physics, and how do we conceive of the kind of sort of some of our critical faith pieces out of a new language or new experience. And then finally, the seasons that can always teach us things: summer, fall, winter, spring. And then the last gallery is Transforming Power of Communal Contemplation. And this is sort of looking a little bit into the future. You know, how can we exercise contemplative power? Now, synodality has become very popular in the Catholic Church because of the bishops, their attempt at it. But truly, synodality is very much like dialogue, contemplative dialogue. That's probably why it wasn't very successful, because I'm not sure all the bishops and the clerics have such an interior life that they're able to actually risk dialogue. Consider the snail as just a cute way of saying, how do we evolve? The cosmic sentry, living out of love and forgiveness and evolutionary hope. So those are the galleries. And here's like a spaciousness to create page. So again, it's simply inviting you to use your contemplative gaze, set the intention in your heart, spend some time, either after every reflection or at the end. And what has been your experience of those reflections? What have been invoked in you, become present to you, challenged or shifted in you? And then give it a creative expression if you want. I think words are very creative. So words, drawing, doodle, whatever. But again, it's knowing that this book isn't just to be read. It's not a treatise. It's not a conversion. It's simply a sharing, and to evoke in you then your own deepening experience of the divine. What there are at the end are notes. And this is where the theory comes in. So there's quite a few notes explaining, let's say, morphogenic fields, understanding spiral dynamics, a deepening understanding of Connie Fitzgerald's work. So in these notes are your theory or your text, but they're not, hopefully you won't find them too often in the actual reflections to sort of stop your own journey inward. And then here's an part of Gallery 3. And I stop here because what I'd like to do is have us actually have a little experience. This is a short reflection. And actually to do it we have to be carefully taught to hate. So let me stop sharing for a moment. And then after this, what I'll do is we'll simply open it up for responses, questions, whatever, okay? So if you just step back, that is sort of the book and my hopes and desires. And just breathe for a few times deeply as I get the book for our paper. Here we go. And so being spacious and creating that spaciousness within you, just listen to, like a Lectio almost. We have to be carefully taught to hate. As I reflected on the violent demonstration that resulted from the white supremacist and neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, the lyrics of a song in South Pacific by Rodgers and Hammerstein came to mind. It is a song that isn't always on the list of top tunes of that musical. It is sung by a U.S. officer who is falling in love with a young Native woman and is struggling with his feelings toward her. The words that have always haunted me are, "You've got to be taught to hate. You've got to be carefully taught before it's too late, before you are 7 or 8. I found myself saying over and over, "You've got to be carefully taught," as I watched the coverage of Charlottesville and the violence began. I was sickened as I saw the bottles being thrown at those who came to stand in nonviolent opposition to the white nationalists, the Klan, and the alt-right. It is hard for me to understand how there are still people who believe that the United States of America is and should be a white nation. Or perhaps I don't want to believe this about fellow citizens. It is a worldview expressed in that 1949 musical. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. That teaching happens consciously and unconsciously. I began to reflect. When do we begin to see color as a defining characteristic indicating inferiority or superiority? When do we look at noses, lips, hair, and body shapes and formulate judgments about what kind of a person she or he is? When do we hear grammar and voice intonations as sign of one's level of education or upbringing? When do we no longer see individuals, but only perceive them as a group that is threatening a way of life? When do we learn to be afraid and hate the other? Who teaches us that? So many people, and in so many ways. As the song says, you have to be taught before it is too late, before 7 or 8. The question for us is, how can we be untaught? Perhaps it need not be said that such unteaching would involve how the media portrays difference, what is taught in schools, how churches speak about race and religion, but it has to touch more deeply into our very being. We need to see with new eyes and hear with new ears. We need to take a long, loving look at the real. We have work to be done if we are to survive and thrive as a loving, relational community of great and complex diversity. What obstacles are you aware of in yourself to seeing that we are all one? That is hard work, and contemplative practice helps us to do this. It helps us to get in touch with how we are all one and more similar than different. It helps us become aware of our biases, so rooted in culture and familiar beliefs. It helps us surrender to the divine working within us to teach us who we really are in this planetary community. So what is arising in you as you reflect on what needs to be untaught? And we'll just take about 3 minutes, and I'll just come back. And then if anyone wants to share, we'll open it up, and then we'll move toward a more general question. So what is arising in you? What needs to be untaught? So if there's anything arising in you, would you go, if you know how to do this, to go to the react and you have a hand gesture there. And then I think you come right to the front of the screen. So we'll try that. And then if not, you can just raise your hand and I'll try to see you. There's two screens on mine right now, so I'll have to run around. But anything that anyone would like to share after that reflection. Mary Winters. And don't forget to unmute.
Bravo. I am so moved. So what came up with me is the archies that we are so unconsciously taught by. And where so the patriarchy of power and love and kingdom is just, it has to be disintegrated. And I, with my anger and with my search for the female divine, when I look at everybody's faces here, it is trying to rise. So where can I be in that reign? It's a new reign that we're experiencing now, a new reign of God, a new reign of Sophia. And it's people like you, and I have other women groups that have just sustained me through this. I came to one of your retreats in the Jersey Shore at the beginning of Trump, I think it was. I'm so grateful for my contact with you then, and the contemplation piece. And this is it, man. We're not ladies, women, men. This is it. This is it. So thank you. Bravo. You're a prophet. I'm going to purchase the book.
Thank you. I see MC and I don't. So MC, if you'd unmute yourself and then identify MC.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got in a little late and I was going to change that to Mary Carol, but MC.
Welcome, Mary Carol. Good to see
you. I had been working almost all summer on Eddie Hillisom's book on the bunch of her letters. I did it because Richard Rohr quoted her in one of his columns. Why is there war? There's war because I and my neighbor don't love enough. And that just fascinated me. And I had read the book earlier and was impressed with her relationship with God and how it developed through the book. And so I worked on that and I took notes and I got all this in my head, but I didn't know what to do with it. Well, one of the things she did with it was she turned to poetry. And when she went to the ovens, she had with her a Bible and a book of poems by Rilke. And I thought, what on earth? Well, if I were going, what would I take? So I thought, who's Rilke? What's he do? And then as the Spirit blesses us, Spiritual Directors International had a 4-week thing on Rilke. And I went to that and it was fantastic. But what it's saying is exactly what your book is spelling out, in the sense of, getting deep and getting reactions and understanding what's going on in us and having the tools to do it. And I think that's what your book helps. Because I thought, I'm going to zip through this so I know what you're talking about. This is not a zip through book. So, I think it's going to be really helpful. And it just fits in with what we need, doesn't it?
I hopefully. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, good.
Beth.
As I was listening, what do I need to be untaught? And I guess, two things came to my mind. One is I need to be taught to say we without exception. and that includes all of creation. And the other thing is, what is the other thing? It's escaped. Thanks.
That's right. That's where we are. Joanne. Oh, would you unmute yourself, Joanne?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, but now your picture's gone. So you could put your video back on if you want. We had your picture, not your sound. But we can hear you, so you can go ahead.
There.
Are you still there, Joanne? Joanne?
No.
Joanne's muted again.
Is muted again.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Kid. Joanne, you're muted again. We don't have your face, and now we don't have your voice. We need more. Okay. Well, what we can do is, oh, Kathleen, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something, Kate? We can go ahead until I'll watch for her unmuting. I'll see if she unmutes herself.
Nancy, my hearing's not real clear, even with these. Did you just say to me, go forward?
I did, because I was watching for Joanne. So after you're finished, Joanne, we'll go back to you, and then we'll just open it up for more general conversation if you want. Okay, Kate?
When you said, what do we need to be untaught? There is, for me, still this instant arising that is really a reaction, often, that has been so real in this last political thing. There's the immediate reaction in terms of hope and future with Kamala Harris. And then there's this other that I just shut up. That becomes a very us versus them. And it's not just about thinking it, but it's these lies. How to respond to downright lies. And so that's a real part of my struggle. I'll just say that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Kate, I certainly understand that, and I certainly feel it as well at times. And what I'm trying to right now, I don't have yet. It's the metaphor I'm sort of using is right now my bedroom's behind me, and across the way is a building being gutted. So when I go to pray in the morning, 20 minutes, I'm now staying in the midst of noise from 6 o'clock in the morning with all this clutter of debris going down the chute. And I sort of have a feeling that's right now, that's how I'm experiencing what's happening. It's clutter, it's noise. It's the easiest thing to do is to tear things apart. And how do we get below that? You'll have to express it. I mean, there's a couple of things in here that talks about lamentation, the one around the pen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Heaving. We've got to do some of that. But then how do we release it? Because we are in a terribly, the world is no longer the traditional world. We know great relativity. So what is a lie for us is not a lie for someone else. And how do we just begin to struggle with that?
Mm-hmm.
I won't say much more, yeah. But I think I think you need to say it out loud. But it's then, do we keep reacting to it? Do you keep fostering that, or do you deal with it in another new way? And I believe we have to do that. One of the things Bernice Solomar and I are working on for a program this coming winter is a polarity wisdom. How do you look at these things not in opposition to each other, but in a flow? And how do you get yourself balanced? And it's a great imbalance.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. I see Joanne, and then we'll do quickly if we can be in Kit, and then and then there are the questions. These are important things too, so they're all questions. So Joanne, now you're unmuted.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nancy. I did read almost all of the book except for the liturgical season, and it's still like in pieces in my mind. So I'm going to read it over, and that's why I'm on this call, because of what you said I need to go over. From your piece here about the how we have to be taught to hate. I am reminded, can you still hear me?
Yes,
Okay, I am reminded of the movie, the Conclave. It kind of just came to me in that time of reflection. This is not a spoiler, but one of the things that was said, that the bishop was not, the cardinal was not, there was not a diminishment of faith in God, but in faith in the church. And it's funny that what came to me in our little exercise just a little while ago was something from the church, the Catholic Church, that we practice, of repentance and grace. And that I'm grateful for that, to be reminded that in order to move not only personally but collectively, the whole piece about repentance for the fact that we do have hate, and the grace to be able to move out of that. So that's what happened to me from the reflection. And I'm grateful that we took a focus exercise, because the book is so much that I was grateful just to have that exercise and then see what I do with that for the rest of the book, or other parts of the book. So thanks.
and that's probably why it's not, I usually say it's not something you read cover to cover, is that, because it is pieces, but they weave together if they're entangled. Okay.
That's
VJ.
And the sketching did come. The sketching came when I gave the time for the contemplative practice. I was surprised how many sketches did come, and I didn't sketch now, but what came was the movie. And so it does come together.
I wanted to share that your book helps to embrace a contemplative heart. And I think at this time, with everything going on, this is also a Christ evolution. We need to bring a Christ consciousness to the forefront. And here in Advent coming up, while we think about the birth of Jesus, it's what are we going to birth into the world? And we come out of what you have written about as a contemplative heart. And so I thank you very much. And I think to each of us, personally and together, are part of this Christ evolution.
Thanks, BJ. And that section on liturgical feasts sort of tries to reflect on a lot more of a similar kind of a thinking that you just expressed. And Kit, you'll be our fine. Then we'll open it up again just for generic thoughts or questions.
Well, so much is going on in my mind. I guess sort of one little practice that I sort of developed for myself is I can be very like seeing people and coming to all these judgments and everything. And one thing that I found helps is when I catch myself doing that, I stop and I say, I'm not saying this to the person, but I'm saying it really to myself. I say, hello, beautiful. I don't know your story. And it's just really helpful to say that and think that, because I don't. And that I also know that even if I'm not in the place of holding that consciousness, there are times when I can, and certainly the divine does see beauty or that reflection of the divine in everyone and everything. So I found that very helpful. And also another thing that's helpful for me is I think so many people, and I can be in this group at times, we're just like coming from a place of fear, because so much is happening and across the spectrum and things like that. And so that helps me hold more compassion also. And I've mentioned before, so many members of my closest beloved family see things much differently than I do. They're Trump supporters, they're Netanyahu supporters, all these things. So it's so challenging, but it's also been very helpful in not doing the same kind of othering I would be doing if I just lived in this bubble where so many of my friends are. So that's helpful, and also the idea of evolutionarily includes who's in our we. So some people, they're we, they don't get it because they don't get it because they're just at a place of different we. But I can feel so angry, and especially now what's happening with the Trump appointees and so many things. And I live in Washington, D.C., and this has huge implications for those of us who live in D.C., because there's a risk, because they have talked about getting rid of home rule, just taking over the city completely, removing, we have no voting representation now, but just taking away our right to vote for president, taking away our gun safety, so many things that, and destroying the main industry in our city. So it's just really, it's so huge. And then the rabbi who was recently killed in one of the, I'm blanking on which Arab country. It's very interesting because he's a Chabad rabbi, and a whole part of my family is Chabad, and they are out, I guess, in a Christian terminology, ministering. I mean, they're out internationally and domestically working with on setting up ministries and things. So it's just so much, and I can also feel really angry. So thank you all for.
Thanks, Kit. Okay, so any just comments if you've been reading the book, if you have questions about it, please just raise your hand, and I can't tell if it's someone. We'll start with Cesar. I know you've been reading, doing some work on it.
Yes, for some reason I couldn't automatically raise my hand, but I meet with folks and we've read the book, we've worked through it, and I've done definitely some work in it. It's resonates tremendously with my life and my journey. So I'm pretty much oriented to just about everything that Nancy is discussing. It's kind of birds of a feather, well, anyway, but there's, one of the things that I'm, and Nancy was discussing process work, where we look at the polarizations, the polarizing. As soon as we just begin discussing that, we take the attention off the individual. Thank goodness, because it's been confusing us all the time. We think that the individual is the one who's doing this. Meanwhile, a sea of collective, it's energy. And the point is that nature is what's going on. And yes, we have to, of course, balance it with an understanding that there is an individual there. However, to see an individual without seeing nature is an error. It's an error. And the indictment of nature is an indictment of God. We have to get courageous about this and understand that God is beyond good and evil. I mean, this is to the best of my understanding. And we still don't lose our accountability for the individual. We still, however, it's majorly tempered, big time. And it's a very big adjustment, a huge adjustment, and it's unbelievable. I mean, when I encountered that type of perspective, I got it early up, but it leaves me wondering, I don't feel that many people understand that. And even when I discuss it, many are offended. It's not an easy situation. And I'm not terribly diplomatic either. So, it's been tough. Thank you.
Thanks, Cesar. And I hope I'll be interested if any of you work with people who perhaps aren't on the same wavelength, maybe as Cesar or yourself, how this might get interpreted. I tried not to use language that's offensive or too what I would call it had negative energy, the rallying. But it will challenge some of the traditional ways of looking at the divine and how we think about ourselves in relationship to the world and each other. So I hope it has some use in those communities. I don't know. It'll be probably up to some of you who might use it there, and you can let me know. But thanks, Cesar. Thanks for working with it too. That you got through all of it already in a book with a book club is pretty amazing to me. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Dora, and just unmute yourself. There you go.
Years ago, when I was studying, a professor wrote on the board, every living system is perfect, and every living system is all screwed up. And reading your book really brought that to life again with me. Every living system, whether it's a human being, whether it's an object, whether it's an institution, it's perfect because it is. So whatever it has had to do to change to survive, it accomplished that, and it is. But it's all screwed up because those things that it had to change in order to survive, the tendency is to cling to those things. And so that screws us up for the future, that it's hard to let go of some of those things, and yet it's absolutely necessary to change in order to continue to exist. And I see that so clearly, like in our politics and in our church. I don't as often recognize it within myself. And I think for the gift to me of your book is helping me to see it within myself and others, which have the same struggle that I have, and being more respectful of that process within, but being open to change whatever is needed in order for me to continue to exist. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Dora. That's a lot to ponder about too, that quote from your professor. Thank you. I have time for maybe just one more comment, and then I'll bring it to a close so we can end at 11. It's about 4 minutes. Oh, Beth. Now, let me just check, Beth, and make sure. Is anyone who had not yet said anything want to say something first? Looking around. Okay, Beth.
Just a quick question. I missed Pentecost on your list of feasts. What was you thinking there?
Not heavy duty thinking. I ended it at Easter. I know. I maybe that'll be for the second edition. I'll add Pentecost. There really was probably no. I hate to say, doing this is very. You can imagine it's pretty time consuming. And so after I wrote the first part, anyway, I have no excuse. I mean, so it's the second edition. Maybe that's what I'll say from now.
I was just curious. Thanks, Nancy.
That's all right.
Thank you for the book too.
Thank
it's
you.
great.
Well, good. Well, I would just invite you all, the only, because it's self-published, self-marketing, it'll only get out there if you talk about it with people. And if you try to expose it on your own, so if you do social media, wherever that is, or to spread the word or to do it with a group, I would greatly appreciate it. Because I think, I mean, everybody thinks what they write might be good, but I think that could be helpful to a variety of people. So I hope this gives you a little energy. And if you don't have it yet, you just have to go on Amazon and either enter my name with an IHM, because there actually are 3 Nancy Sylvesters who write on Amazon. One is a parliamentarian, and one writes about something about dirt or something. I was sort of interesting. So, and I don't know they've got me in some category that sometimes I appear correctly with other people, but sometimes the books they put me with are strange. So I don't have any idea how to appeal that. If anyone does, email me that. But anyway, just go or put the journey -faith, and it comes right up then in an entangled world. Okay. And I think they're good Christmas presents. So just a little thing, because it's a pretty book, and to hold it and to open it, it's nice. To let you know though, it is going to be on Kindle, but not till the early, maybe February. It's a whole nother process to put a paperback version into an email version. I'm learning so much trivia about all of this. It's but anyway, it takes time.